Transmitter device activated. Coordinates set for Earth 2.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Earth 2 podcast, the podcast that explores the origins and development of the DC Comics multiverse and the legacy of their Golden Age characters through the Silver and the Bronze Ages of comics. I'm Peter Watson.
And I'm David Steele. Welcome back. Thank you for joining us. As promised, we're doing the Jay Garrick Flash solo story from issue 201 of The Flash this week, a comic that was published on the 3rd of September 1970. Do you want to tell everyone about the cover?
Yes, we have the Flash logo. We're in a basketball court. There is a team of youths who are walking about in the background, carrying a basketball, funnily enough. And in the front, there is a Hispanic kid in a wheelchair, and he's throwing a basketball shirt at the Flash, who's in tears in the front of the cover. It's another one of these crying Flash covers.
I know.
There's so many of them in this era. It's ridiculous.
Man up, Barry.
And the kid in the wheelchair saying, "Your blunder made me a cripple, Flash. I'll never play basketball again." But that's not the story we're covering.
No.
In the bottom corner, there is a flash, no pun intended, that says "Special, a new Golden Age Flash story." And there's a lovely headshot of Jay Garrick right in that corner. And underneath that is an Infantino and Anderson signature. There
Awesome.
you go.
It's a cracker.
Yes.
It's a cracker. Lovely, clean lines on Barry Flash. It's the shiny floor. Very, very effective. It's a beast. But yes, there's a new solo story for the Golden Age Flash, Jay Garrick, who we saw quite a lot at the start of the podcast, but latterly we haven't seen him quite so much. So it's nice that he's getting this little solo outing, as it were. Without any further ado then, we jump past the basketball Barry story and we arrive at a caption that says, "Presenting the Golden Age Flash in Finale for a Fiddler." And in the foreground of the panel, we see the long white-haired version of the Fiddler that we saw in JLA 21 and 22, and who encountered Jay Garrick, the original Flash, several times back in the day, as Peter told you all about in our last episode. We see him in the foreground, noodling away. The title of the story is rendered on a sort of scroll of sheet music. And in a similar fashion to one of the stories we did last time, the two Ds in Fiddler have been replaced with musical notes. If you remember last time, the two Ds in Fiddler were replaced by a couple of violins in the Golden Arrow story. And Jay Garrick is whooshing around the Fiddler. It's a gorgeous little bit of graphic representation of everything that's going on. The words and music are by
Robert Kanigher and Murphy Anderson.
Now the next panel is a cracker. It's the first time I think we've really seen this, isn't it?
Yeah, nothing like this for a very long time anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a panel showing the Earth. There's a blue cosmic void in between, and then there's another Earth, and the caption on the blue cosmic void says,
"Separated from our Earth by a cosmic curtain impenetrable to any eye is a parallel Earth. On the other side of this dimensional barrier lives the fastest man of Earth 2, the Golden Age Flash, otherwise known as Jay Garrick of Keystone City."
Yes, we're at home with the Garricks in this panel. We can see Joan in the foreground, Jay struggling to put on his Flash boots as Joan says, "You'll be late, honey. Hurry." "I'm doing the best I can, Joan, but I'm not as young as I used to be."
Then, in answer to a police alarm,
Yes, we see Jay speeding along in action as the Flash, ducking from some bullets that are being fired from behind what looks like a giant tortoise shell. But Jay helpfully thinks, "Turtle Man's hoods are using him for cover. Slugs almost singe me. Can't seem to vibrate with my old-time finesse." And then in the first panel of page 2, take a drink. Jay has run over and grabbed a dustbin lid to use as a shield as the bad guys continue to fire at him, and we see Turtle Man revealed, and he says,
"Ha! I knew if I held out long enough, I'd live to see the Scarlet Speedster, just a flash in the pan."
and with a splang and a zoom and what's that one? Bing!
Bing.
The bullets go flying from the dustbin lid as Jay retaliates. "Who rides your material, Turtle Man?" In panel 3, it's a closer shot of Jay as it seems that his shield isn't working quite as well as he hoped, as he says, "Slugs drilling right through my cover. They don't make things as good as they used to be."
Old man shakes fist at cloud.
Yeah, I can see a common theme emerging in the story already, and we're only like 5 panels into it. In the next panel, Jay gives up using the dustbin lid as a shield and hurls it towards the two bad guys with the guns who duck out of the way, as Turtle Man says,
"You should have retired when you had a chance, Flash. You're obsolete."
Gosh. Caption for the next panel,
Gaspingly summoning his melting reserves of power, the veteran Flash hurls himself on his impassive enemy.
This is a nice panel showing Jay in action. It's doing that thing when, you know those panels when you see like Spider-Man swinging through the hole of his leaping around over a building and stuff. And
With all the after images.
Yeah. So basically Jay runs in from the left and zooms around, knocking out the bad guys, the two goons, one after the other, and then grabbing Turtle Man and knocking him on his back. And as all this is going on, he's saying, "Me? Retire? Not while I've got a breath left." Cracking. That'll end up in the socials. First panel of page 3.
After police collar the gang.
So we see a helpful young policeman standing at the back of a police van that's presumably going to cart off the bad guys, and he says to the Flash,
"Sure love to see you vibrate, Flash. How about racing us to the jail? It's a mile from here. Give us 19 blocks head start."
"Wouldn't be fair. I used to. I mean, I can vibrate faster than light. I could circle the earth while you're still shifting gears." In the next panel, the police van is driven off, and Jay looks exhausted, hanging over a post box, looking very tired, his hat at a jaunty angle as he thinks, "Good thing I convinced him. I'm pooped. About all I could circle now is my own house."
Later, at home.
Jay sat down, helmet's off, he's got his feet up, Joan's helping him take off his boots as the Flash says, "Can't understand what's happening to me, Joan." Joan replies, "It's happening to everyone, honey. Time is marching over you. But I like you just the way you are. The grey at your temples is groovy. Makes you look distinguished." And yes, we get a clear shot of Jay's grey temples, clearly highlighted in this panel. Panel 4, page 3. Joan is now giving Jay a bit of a shoulder massage, as she's saying, "Back feel better now, darling? I want you in good shape for the rock festival at Stockwood tomorrow. I'm depending on you to battle your way through that rock-bound crowd to get me a seat up front." That's interesting. Caption for the next panel then.
On the road to the rock festival the following day, Flash's most formidable foe, the Fiddler.
Yes, it's a very interesting, beautiful art from Mr. Anderson. We can see a long trail of vehicles, including a motorcyclist with a guitar over his back and a VW Beetle and some hitchhikers all making their way towards the festival. And we see the distinctive fiddle-shaped car that the Fiddler drives. Has this been in the podcast before? I can't remember
if it was in the Crime Champions one. I love that car though. It's phenomenal.
It is. The Fiddler is driving along and he has 3 passengers in his back seat. And one of them says, "Look at that mob, Fiddler." Fiddler replies,
"More than Nero had when he played in ancient Rome. Only at the end of my act, these cats will be burned up."
Uh-oh, that doesn't bode well. First panel of page 4. Cars come to a halt. 3 passengers have disembarked. They're walking away as the Fiddler points and says,
"When I start fiddling around, my electronic music will send them into orbit. That's your cue to rob the $1 million till, my Fiddlers 3.
"Right on," says the dark-haired chap. Let's just mention, there's one with short dark hair, a kind of older-looking guy. Actually, that looks like Ronnie Barker in Porridge, doesn't it?
It does actually, yeah.
That's a reference for our American listeners there. There's another longer-haired chap as well, so these are his 3 sidekicks. Interesting, they're up to no good. Electronic music at Woodstock? What?
The Fiddler goes electric.
Yes, oh my goodness, yeah, it's like Dylan at the jazz thingy and becoming a Judas. This is what this is all about. Caption then for panel 2, page 4.
Meanwhile, on the road, a solid mass of cars and characters.
See a couple of long-haired kids in the foreground. We also back-to-back vehicles, one of which is being driven by Mr. and Mrs. Garrick. Joan is saying, "Jay, we'll never get close enough to the bandstand to hear anyone. And you promised." "Don't remind me, Joan. If I don't get you there, I'll never hear the end of it. But that's married life, I guess."
A blur of super speed and an invisible switch of garments.
And this is interesting because they're going to obviously some kind of very hippie-ish music festival, but Jay's wearing a shirt and tie. Jay, you're such a square. Oh my goodness. But this is a great shot of him changing into costume at high speed, untying his tie, opening his shirt, putting on his Flash uniform and donning his helmet. And while all this is taking place, he's whispering, "What Jay Garrick can't deliver, the Flash will. Even if my bones creak a bit these days. A slow dissolve."
A moment later...
Yes, and we can see a band on stage. They're singing,
"Send the generals to war, and there'll be war no more, no more."
That's very interesting. That's almost a riff on Make War No More,
Yes.
which they were starting to say at the end of a lot of the war comics run about this time.
Indeed.
Which is another excuse for us to mention our good pals Max and Rich and the Weird Warriors podcast.
Of
Not
course.
we need an excuse to mention. Now, this is a great panel because we see the crowd, massive, a lot of older men with long hair and beards and girls with flowers in their hair and long hair and obviously what looks like a couple of Hells Angels types. A couple of guys wearing shades. And the band on stage, they appear to be wearing old school sort of military stuff. Very old-fashioned gear indeed, because What we see, almost running over the top of the crowd now, is the Flash running forward with Joan Garrick. And Joan is saying, "Faster, Flash, or we'll miss the spiked helmets." And Jay replies, "We're in luck. I see a spot, just room enough for two." I mean, I work a lot of music festivals, and this is just like, nowadays they're just so different. This is one tiny little, almost wooden platform stage with no barrier, no massive PA, nothing to sort of separate the audience at all. I mean, is it any wonder that someone died at Altamont? But anyway, that's another story. We arrive at the first panel of page 5, and Jay comes to a halt, but they're dug up by a couple of long-haired youngsters who are nearby because they've got in the road. One of them says,
"These over 30s are sticking their neurotic noses everywhere, trying to steal our thing, when they should be in rocking chairs."
And Joan to this says, "Sorry." And this is, I mean, I like the idea of Mr. and Mrs. Garrick being down with the kids. Joan obviously is a bit more of a younger spirit than Jay, I think. But anyway, so the next panel, panel 2 of page 5, Joan and Jay have sat down, and one guy with kind of receding brown hair and a beard, he's obviously much older than he's claiming to be, with a massive CND medallion round his neck.
He looks a bit like Charlie Manson.
He does. I wonder if that's intentional. He's draping a little garland of flowers around Joan's neck, and he says,
"You're beautiful people to be out here at your age."
And another girl sticks a flower behind one of the wings of Jay's helmet. She says,
"Hope you don't get rheumatism sitting in the damp grass."
And another fellow optimistically says,
"Love will keep you warm."
Tremendous. Now, the next panel, they've got very good seats here. We're almost in the crowd's eye point of view. And look at the way Jay's been drawn there. Does that not just scream Carmine?
Yes.
That's gorgeous. This is really, really nice. Joan and Jay looking up at the stage, and the Fiddler has leapt into view, bounded up onto the stage. Joan says, "Flash, look who's stepped out of your souvenir album, the Fiddler." To which Jay says, "Wonder what he's up to in his old age." And then we see the Fiddler on the stage. The camera almost tracks towards him as he starts to play in his violin, and he seems to be singing,
"Your heart's a pocket full of gold, pouring into my hands like grains of sand."
Interesting. He's obviously down with the now sound. He's probably been listening to the Mamas and the Papas more than anything else. Maybe the first panel of page 6.
"At the tidal wave of electronic sound that wells up from the fiddler's instrument."
Yes, that is interesting because it just looks like a normal violin. But
It does.
It must
He
be a
souped it up.
machine, yeah. Basically, things are kicking off. All heck is breaking loose. There's almost a wave of different coloured concentric circles radiating out from the centre of where the fiddler is playing. Obviously, this is the influence and the effect of his music. One of the kids cries,
"Whee!
and another one says,
I'm all shook
and
up."
some of them start running. There's one guy in the foreground with trousers with stars all over them and a very tight-fitting shirt and a large flamboyant hat and a beard. He looks very contemporary. And they're all kind of freaking out a little bit. Jay looks very troubled, and Joan says, I'll be all right, Flash. Get at the root of the trouble." Obviously, Jay's concerned about Joan. Jay starts to run towards the stage in the next panel, and the Fiddler sees him and says,
"Ah, here comes Flash, my old nemesis, super speeding onto the scene of my robbery."
Jay is thinking, feels like I'm running into a stone wall. He's also having trouble getting through whatever it is the Fiddler is unleashing. And if indeed, the Fiddler clarifies in the next panel when he says,
"It's a battle of vibrations, Flash, yours against mine. What's the matter? Your bones too creaky to break through?"
It's a point of view shot between Jay's ankles, almost looking up at the stage as he's kind of frozen. We're privy to Jay's thoughts as he thinks, like running in a treadmill, getting nowhere. In the next panel, final panel of page 6, it's almost over-the-shoulder shot of the Fiddler, who looks more handsome than he's ever done.
Yes, that wig's doing him wonders.
Yes, in any rendering, he looks almost like Liberace or someone like that, maybe.
George Hamilton sort of looked him.
Even a hint of John Pertwee or Ricardo Montalban or something.
Yeah, I can
and
see that.
we can see the Flash still being struck by the waves of sound. There's a few farm buildings in the background, which are quite charming. And the Thinker says,
"You've run out of gas, old timer. Your attack has turned into a retreat, a rout."
and as we say, the concentric circles are still rippling out, and we see Jay being forced backwards. In the large panel that starts off page 7, we see him firing backwards into the farm building. It's an interesting panel. From the stage, the Fiddler cries,
"Happy crash landing, Flash."
and as Flash goes falling backwards, we can see it looks as though he's about to land on a pile of hay, but he's thinking, just as I counted on. Fiddler's so doubled up with laughter, he's stopped playing. And indeed he has. He's Fiddler in one hand, bow in the other. And Jay seems to recover his wits very quickly because panel 2 shows him running circles around the Fiddler's 3 cohorts who we met briefly at the start of the story, who we referred to as the Fiddler's 3. And we can see the piles of cash that they're obviously pilfering. One of the guys cries,
Flash!
as Jay runs circles round them all, saying, "Just passing through. Long enough to put you on ice and that loot in cold storage." Fantastic. Caption then for panel 3.
Before that same second can tick away, the Scarlet Speedster bursts upon the Fiddler.
Tremendous. Jay zooms back to the stage. There's a very amusing zong sound effect as he pulls the strings from the bow. The Fiddler looks aghast and cries,
Caught me with my bow down.
and the final panel, the Flash is zooming off, bearing the Fiddler in front of him as one young kid says,
Groovy.
Joan, Mrs. Garrick, cries, "What a finale!" And then we have a little musical note symbol which has written upon it,
The end.
And there's another caption that says,
Kirby is coming.
and by now we've probably already talked about that. So, that's it.
Thanks for listening to the
Over in the nutshell, that was fantastic. Finale for a Fiddler. Now that was interesting. Jay seemed to catch his second wind towards the end.
Yep.
Interesting that the motif about him getting old and slowing down. I mean, I don't know how many times over the years there have been stories that have alluded to Jay slowing down and getting too old, but then he snaps back into it and everything's fine.
It's brilliant, isn't it?
So that's obviously all a reference to the actual Woodstock Festival, which happened over the weekend of the 15th to the 18th of August 1969. With this comment being published over a year later shows how much Robert Kanigher had his finger on the pulse. Compared to that Beatles-inspired story we did a few weeks ago, you know, this is positively out of date. But it's interesting. It's nice to think that the old squares like Robert Kanigher and Murphy Anderson's
Finger on the
are
pulse.
still trying to keep in tune with the kids and get in touch with the vibe. Beautiful artwork, really. A lot to enjoy in the short 7 pages. It'll be fun picking out some panels for the socials.
Certainly would be, yes. No, I really enjoyed that. That was great fun. Any chance to see the Fiddler's car in action, I'll be honest, I'm all over that.
Yes.
Remember when they did The Secret Six and the Fiddler was in it at first and they got rid of him very quickly? He was in it at the start and basically they got rid of him. I think they kept the car for a bit.
That was fun. I mean, nice to see the Fiddler making catty comments about age and Jay just not rising to it and just showing that he still had it.
Mm-hmm. I do like that it was Joan that was the driving force to get him out there.
Yes.
Yeah, that was fun. She was like, yeah, come on, let's do this. And she's like, okay. And he puts on his suit and tie just to get ready to, hang out with the kids. It's amusing.
But I like the idea of Joan still being down with it, and you can tell she probably listens to a lot of contemporary music and that Jay just thinks is noise.
Yeah.
But she's probably, as I said, a young spirit, so wasn't put off by any of all that. No, that was great fun.
The spiked helmets didn't really seem like a very hippie-ish kind of band.
I sort of thought about that. There were still bands at that sort of time that were still sort of having almost uniforms, like Gary Puckett and Union Gap, for example. Their famous hits, Young Girl and Lady Willpower. Their uniforms, their stage gear was very much based on Civil War style uniforms.
Okay.
And remember, it's 3 years after Sgt. Pepper. Maybe that's what they were trying to be. You're right. Maybe it was also a reference to the Hells Angels, and because some of them would wear that sort of gear.
Yeah.
And,
we had some biker-looking people in the crowd. Yeah.
Yeah, and as you said, it was a Charlie Manson lookalike. But it was amusing seeing all the hippies and stuff in this story, like a year after Woodstock, because the way that the cultural sort of landscape changed in those days was really, really quick. So I mean, the story's probably as dated then as it was now. I'm not sure.
Yeah, true.
So we'll now very quickly look at the contemporary correspondence that references this story from issue 204 of The Flash.
And the first letter says, Dear Editor, Flash 201 was a whiz. The lead story, $1 Million Dream, was artfully spun, exploring the possibilities of psychically induced paralysis in those who are supposed to be the flashiest of people. Good tale by Bob Kanigher. He writes some other kind? Well, occasionally, yes. Like what he did with, the Golden Age Flash in Finale for a Fiddler. Hurrah that those of us who grew up in the Golden Age were privileged to return to those thrilling days of yesteryear for a brief space and see the great Jay Garrick speed into action again in his very own story. That was most stimulating and rewarding, and Murph's art is quite right for depicting the Flash of Earth 2, but the tale itself was simply inane, at best whimsical, and additionally, it was too truncated to be interesting. Well, seriously, is it necessary to make a monkey out of a guy who's still every inch a bona fide hero, a la the Justice Society adventures in your Justice League of America mag? The slowing down bits, melting reserves of power, inability to vibrate with the old-time finesse, gasping for breath as he runs, and having to be told by his wife to hurry. Ye gods! And especially Mercury, this is too much! Crikey.
That's probably fair. It was a bit overdone, wasn't it?
And the editorial response is...
The flash pans directed at the concept of an ageing, slow-footed super speedster hit their target. It won't happen to the original Flash again. JS. So the next letter... Ooh! Wait to see who the next letter's from, listeners. Dear Editor, remember the old days when Flash used to battle costume supervillains? Remember how Captain Cold, Mirror Master, Trickster, or one of the others regularly broke out of prison to plot crimes in Central City? Remember when human interest stories were the exception and not the rule? I do. It has been a year since a costume villain made an appearance, except for the cameos in issue 200, and they are all sorely missed by at least one reader, me. The Flash always used to be the best hero when it came to fancy-clothed criminals. They were his foes and his alone. They committed crimes just to battle him. But now, alas, it seems that they have all retired and left town, and all Flash does is have human interest problems each issue. And now, alas, you've brought back a couple of supervillains, but not to fight our Flash. No, our Flash can't even walk this month. The Golden Age Flash has to come out of mothballs and pant through 7 pages as he battles not only his old foe the Fiddler, but a weirdie named Turtle Man. Now I ask you, if Bob Kanigher can write stories about the Earth 2 Flash and supervillains, why can't he do the same for the Earth 1 Flash and supervillains? Bring back costume criminals, even if it's only once or twice a year. There must be somebody out there besides me who misses them, and that's from none other than Bob Rozakis.
The answer man himself.
Yes, from Elmont, New York. And he makes a point. I mean, we're into the Bronze Age. This is, the thick of the hard-travelling heroes Green Lantern period.
Yep.
We've already had those pollution-tinged JLA stories a while ago. And, he makes a point, as you said, all these covers of the Flash standing crying.
Crying, yes. Injured.
Yep.
There's a whole massive period of it then. It's very depressing.
Our next episode, listeners, is actually another issue of The Flash, believe it or not. And that kind of cover is another one, but we'll talk about that falls into that trope, but we'll talk about that next week. Editorial response then to Bob's letter is...
All those somebodies who miss Flash's Rogues Gallery, send in your check-marked votes to be counted. If the count is good, count on us to do something supervillainous about it. Julie Schwartz.
Well, I've still got quite a few Flash comics from around this period, and I remember quite a few covers with the Top and Mirror Master and Captain Boomerang and Trickster.
That's more just after this.
They've obviously got
after.
The next few issues still planned, but they do listen, I think, obviously there.
Good. Gets things back on track.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's what it should be. And the final letter, most of it is taken up talking about the initial story, but the last paragraph is about this story. And he says, it was good to see the Golden Age Flash again, but seeing was all that was good. Finale for a Fiddler turned out to be nothing more than a day in the life of an ageing Flash, complete with absolutely no plot. All the little things in the world could not have saved this one. And that's from David C. Hendricks from Clemson, South Carolina. It
was a nice bit of throwaway. I mean, it was harmless. Yeah. I think, obviously, the main basketball story is actually, I think it's actually quite good. The bit when, the boy has to walk to help Flash again and all, it's quite well done. It's quite interesting. But obviously, there's another, as well as the short J story, there's another short 4-page sort of adventure sci-fi sort of story that rounds out the rest of the comics.
Yeah.
It's obviously designed just to be a space filler.
And it's fun.
Yeah.
It's genuinely, it's light-hearted fun, and it's something that we've not really seen a huge amount of the JSA aging. This is like the start of this, really.
Yeah.
And the Grey Temples I love.
Yeah.
I think it's absolutely amazing. The Grey Temples and Jay on Soups as he eventually gets them.
Yep.
It just looks excellent. Speaking as someone who has grey temples himself.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I was going to say, when I started greying in my 30s, I was just like, I'm getting Jay Garrick, Reed Richards grey hair. Fantastic.
Yep, that's it.
I was into it. We've had the odd thing about Wildcat feeling that he's a little bit older and all that sort of stuff. But it's interesting that they touched on it because, let's be honest, by this point, Jay's going to be in his 50s.
At least, yeah.
So it makes sense to at least address it. And I think it was done quite well. It was nice to see the Fiddler. The artwork was gorgeous.
Yeah.
And like I said before, we did Batman 222 a few weeks ago, and that touched into the zeitgeisty aspect of, the rumours about Paul McCartney being dead and the Beatles splitting up. So it was nice to see something else that has a real sort of cultural touchstone to it, and they're really kind of dialing into the vibe. I mean, obviously, no sign of Crosby, Stills and Nash or Neil Young or Jodie Mitchell or anything, but, fair enough. It was fun. I really, really liked it, and it's a nice little story to do. It would have been nice to have some more short backup solo JSA stories, like we've got that Hour Man one randomly that time, and that's Inspector. So it was just nice to have it, and it gives us an easy week in a way. It's not so much for you to edit this time, which is ideal.
And although it was a bit of fluff, there were still some really good moments in it, like, when Jay was trying to deflect with the trash can lid.
Yes.
And of course it went straight through because that's a trope.
Of
You know,
course.
of like, this will protect me, but it doesn't.
Yeah.
And then he throws it like Captain America at them.
Yeah.
I love that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
That was great. But this is just small character bits. The design of that first panel, as you said,
Yeah.
with the musical sheets and the and Jay zooming in, it just looks amazing.
Yeah.
There's tons to enjoy in it. So, yeah, it's lightweight, but it's 7 pages.
All filler, but all killer.
Yes, there
I
you
think
go.
so. That'll do.
But that's what we thought about it. What did you think about it? Please get in touch. You can email us at theearth2podcast@gmail.com. Make sure you follow us on social media. On Facebook and Instagram, we're at the Earth2 Podcast, and on Twitter, we're at podcast_Earth2. And check out our website, theearth2podcast.com, where you can find this and every other episode we've done.
Yeah, be sure to check out the socials. I've managed to dig out a couple more foreign reprints to add to this week. There's still quite a few more of them to come, so check out Instagram and Facebook, and feel free to dig back into the archives and see some of the older stuff. Our approach to the socials is very much to make it as magazine-y as possible, to give you as much extra content and context for all the stuff that we're presenting. So you never know, I might even try and dig out some good photographs from Woodstock just for the sake of it.
Wow, man.
Will we get a tweet that says, "Hi, we're Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young," when we're not being a supergroup composed of members of some former bands we enjoy? Yeah, we probably will. Well, so watch out for that one. Probably about Tuesday or Wednesday. But anyway, appropriately enough then, I suppose, on that note...
Hey, I've been Peter.
And I've been David, and we'll see you again very soon on...
The Earth2 Podcast.
Transmatter cube activated. Return coordinates set for Earth Prime.